Well, I should preface it by saying I've always been sort of a fan and a student of quality spy thrillers, and it's one of my favorite genres. And obviously, I admire not just I'm a bit of a Anglophile in my literary sort of preferences. So most of these names are going to be British, but yeah, it's not just John le Carré. It's the sort of the origins of the genre of the modern spy novel, which is Eric Ambler and Graham Greene and people like that. So I've always been a huge fan. Fleming not so much, but and of course, when a chance sort of presented itself to try to write a spy novel, I really wanted to do the history of the genre justice, while updating it as much as I can with sort of my own experiences and my own areas of expertise. Which I'm not sorry to disappoint any readers or viewers. I'm not part of the intelligence community. I know people who know people, but that's about it. So I can't write authoritatively about what it's like being a CIA officer. Um, but what I do know is the field. I know every country and every city the Collaborators takes place in because I've lived there. Every time I describe a street corner, it's a specific street corner. I know what's behind that street corner. I know which cafe my character would go to. So I try to lean into that as much as possible when sort of writing this sort of what would become my first spy novel. And to reflect that, I made the main character, Ari Falk, sort of a there, but for the grace of God, go I type of figure. Because I could easily see sort of myself making a few different life choices and becoming somebody like him. He's a little younger than me. He is 35 when the novels start. He's sort of nearing 40 by the end of the second novel. So he's about 8, 9 years behind me in age, but he's basically um, he's a Slavic literature major who used ROTC to pay for his college, and then after that you have to serve in the armed forces to sort of to pay them back for the college tuition, and so somebody with his skill set and knowledge of Russian would inevitably be drafted into the intelligence corps, and from there, he gets headhunted by the CIA, and becomes a case officer, but in a sort of really interesting way. He's a, he knows he's had his basic training, but he's no James Bond. He's no Jack Ryan even. What he does is he's a case officer running a small influence operation where basically he feeds true but privileged information to Russian opposition outlets, media outlets, hoping, as the CIA hoped for a while, that publishing these sort of revelations about the Russian elites would move the needle on public sentiment, which it didn't and doesn't, and hence. Ari Falk starts the first novel incredibly frustrated and almost ready to quit, and that's the sort of that to me is where the story starts. Because the engine, without any spoilers, the engine of the Collaborators is basically Ari Falk realizing that um, the CIA is about to basically kind of use up and throw out one of his best assets, and he just kind of, since he's on the verge of quitting anyway, he kind of decides that he's going to see that one through, and he's not going to let that agent of his basically die. And here's a mild spoiler: the agent does die, and then he Then Arifal basically vows to himself to not let that death go to, go to waste, and that's what drags him into the story. Um, all that said, why 2021? Why did I? Because I wrote it in 23 and it came out in 24. Honestly, because of the war in Ukraine. I was when I was writing it, it was still so fresh and so raw and so kind of incomprehensible that first of all, it felt a little, um, I don't know, mercenary and kind of unethical to just turn it into like a genre literature grist, that's one. And second, I wanted to set, the geopolitical now with a hot war in Europe was kind of incomprehensible to me at the time. So I wanted to set the novel in the last waning days of the previous status quo, where you could still cross borders, because at some point Ari, goes to Moscow in the chapter 5 of the book, right? Like after 2022, I would have to um, bend over backwards to figure out how he would do that, because this is an important point. In the kind of spy novels I write, whenever somebody crosses a border, I need to know what visa they're on. Like, people are not just parachuting behind enemy lines, the way they do in so many movies and books that I read and watch. So yeah, so basically, I had to set it in the last geopolitical moment that I could grasp and understand and analyze. In the same way, the Cormorant Hunt, book 2 in this series, is set in 23 and 20 and the spring of 24, despite the fact that I was writing it a little later in that, because again, I could not grasp the sort of the total implications of having Donald Trump back in power. And I think it'll take us all at least a couple of years to grapple with that. So that's why, I always try to set these books in a very specific moment, a couple of years behind us, so that we have some sort of consensus of what the hell that moment, in fact, was. The fun thing about the Collaborators is that it's essentially an odd couple novel. So we have this disillusioned millennial CIA officer at the end of his rope, and we have this privileged kind of a troubled LA heiress who basically decides to figure out what happened with her Russian American sort of financier, father. And after a while, their paths inevitably cross. So you can see that they're on a collision course from the very beginning, because they're basically looking for the same person. So a little less than halfway through the book, they meet up and they kind of reluctantly start working together, and there's a spark of romance there as well, although it's a very realistic kind of adrenaline-driven sort of not really like kind of an ill-advised romance, I would say. But yeah, they once they meet up and she actually starts financing Ari Falk's off the books operation, and as a um, and in exchange kind of invites herself to go along. They visit, yeah, several locations. Again, I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but yeah, they at some point they are in Latvia and Morocco, Thailand, and let's see where else. Oh, and of course Moscow. And what unites all these places is that these are all places that I've lived, right? So again, as I mentioned before, the geography of the book is the geography of my life. Um, in book 2, this became a bit of a problem because I have run out of places I've lived, and I've lived in a lot of places. Even now, I'm based in 3 places basically. I live kind of between LA, Berlin, and the south of Portugal. All of these places are in the books as well. But yeah, so for the second one, I was like, I was basically thinking, what other places do I know well enough to describe? I've spent enough time there to be authoritative about this. And the only two places that I haven't used up in the first book were Prague and Tbilisi, Georgia. So that is basically why in the beginning of the second book, you see Falk hiding out in Georgia because I also visited it very recently in 2023, right before writing about it. So all the details of Tbilisi are very up to date and based on my movements through town. Well, Felix Burnham has a full and a very realistic sort of background. He was born Philip Brenner. This is a little bilingual pun because Brenner is something that burns, right? It's a burner, so that's why he's Felix Burnham. So it's like, and Felix is like almost Phoenix, right? Um, so that's definitely a self-styled name, and he thinks quite a bit of himself. He's very full of himself. He's almost comical in that regard. But he's not a dumb guy. He's a professor, an Oxford educated professor of classics, and um, in my mind, his background is basically he started doing these sort of YouTube series of lectures, kind of like trying to get young men into classical literature more. And then he realized that he could be pushing their buttons um, by sort of throwing in a little, conservative red meat in there. And then suddenly the grift took off, and once he got kicked out of Oxford, he created this thing called the Alpha Academy, which is basically a series of YouTube lectures that you have to pay through the nose for. This is a lot of it is based on like real things that people like Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson do, and there's a little bit of Tucker Carlson in there, and there's a little bit of, but the way I describe him, he's actually, I think, inspired visually more like Bernard Henri Lévy, who's not right wing, but still like has that kind of a sexy professor sort of thing that's very self-styled and et cetera, et cetera. So, in his story is basically the downfall of like a smart man who got a little too greedy and realized that he can make more money by appealing to the absolute worst in human nature, specifically in male nature, specifically in white male nature, and before you know it, the Russian money comes into the picture, and without giving you too many spoilers, a guy like that ends up being a real terrorist. The Cormorant Hunt is very much a standalone sequel. Like you're not really required to read the Collaborators. In fact, when I was writing it, I was taking special care to kind of like do little reintroductions for the characters that we've already met. Uh, you will, if you've read the Collaborators, it enhances some of the passages in the book, but it's not a requirement at all. Um, to me, the book two really snapped into focus when I came up with the with Felix Burnham, the sort of the villain of the book, who is basically this men's rights guru, kind of an online conservative influencer who shares some sort of features of. He's like he's equal parts Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson because he's this sort of pseudo academic, pseudo highbrow influencer who lectures people on the classics and things like that, and then kind of goes into his agenda through this sort of surface level of like classics education and honestly, again, it's like with Ari Falk, everything, every portrait you write is an auto portrait, right? So it's a self portrait. So I basically tried to figure out a way, like my kind of lonely immigrant teens, living in Cleveland, of all places, and learning English from scratch and all that. Like, how would that, like, again, an alternative version of me could use that and become like a villain, basically. What if I sort of, what if my parents didn't instill the right values in me? Like what if I took my late teenage years loneliness and decided to blame women for it, and and not my own shyness. Like, where would that take me? So once I figured out this sort of this character with a background that's very much like mine, but who becomes this sort of right wing influencer, now I had a great foil for Ari Falk, because both of these people, like Falk embodies some of my best qualities and Felix Burnham some of my worst qualities, or worst potential qualities that I could have developed if I went into this sort of influencer grift. And that to me was like that was and is the book, because it's set right before Trump's restoration, but it also shows you the mechanics and the grievances that have led to it, and it shows you the influence of the Russian dark money that's that's been propping up every kind of hard left and hard right sort of challenge to the neoliberal world order, and so I go into that in quite some detail in the book, but again, in hopefully an entertainment in an entertaining in dynamic fashion, because it's not supposed to be a lecture on how we got that way. And of course, there's Asha Tamaskar, who's I really love that character, and basically it's just I don't want Ari Falk to be a James Bond figure with a girl in every port. So I decided that he needs to, and his relationship in the first book is, as I said, more of an adrenaline fueled sort of a fling. So Asha is really sort of the right partner for him. So it's I wanted the book to have a really strong and fun sort of female co-protagonist that's not solely defined by her relationship with Falk. So honestly, I would, once I'm done with the Cormorant trilogy, which is so I'm two books in. I honestly, the thing I would love to do is to do an Asha Tamaskar book, because she's I don't know if it's appropriate for me to write a book with an Indian American female protagonist, but I'm just gonna, I've done everything I could to get every little detail right, and consulted many friends who are thanked in the acknowledgments, and we'll see. I was just listening to the audiobook version of the Cormorant Hunt, which I just received a couple of days ago, and it's read by a wonderful actor and voice actor, Santino Fontana, and he does just incredible voices for every character. He goes like all in on, so when he's when he's reading for Felix Burnham, he has he has a British accent with a bit of like a German twang in it, because that's how he would be talking, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's like it's really, really fun to like hear these voices sort of come to life. But that is kind of what you do when you write these people as well. It's um, there are two pitfalls here. One is every character sounds like the author. That is the pitfall when you try to make everyone be super witty, right? It's like when you like I love and like love, I love Sorkin, but every Sorkin character sounds like Sorkin, right? Like that is sort of the danger there. So as a screenwriter and as a former journalist, okay, people shouldn't all sound like you. On the other hand, the other pitfall is you try to make everyone sound very individual, and you lapse into caricature, right? Like you amplify somebody's speech quirks to such an extent that it becomes a bit of like a shorthand for like, oh, this guy sounds like this, so everything he says is going to sound like that, which is also not true. It's like, we all code switch, multiple times a day. So it's not like every phrase you're going to ever say is going to be a full expression of your speech patterns. So honestly, to me, writing dialogue is finding sort of the perfect balance between my voice and their voice, between witty and realistic, and you also have to keep it moving, you know, like my books are fairly talky, but no one wants to, you know, see a page that's nothing but dialogue, because that's when the screenwriter in me kicks in and it's like, well, and you think of it as like, okay, well, if you're writing like this, write a stage play or a screenplay. Like you have the entirety of the literary toolkit at your disposal. Stop just like throwing up dialogue. Um, so that's another concern, So basically, it just becomes about triangulating between these pitfalls until you come up with something that's realistic but propulsive and voicey but not caricatured.